Greetings, YouTube. Something that I've seen a number of times in the news cycle, seems to every few months or so it comes back up again because maybe there's a specific time period you have to rest a topic before you bring it back up again. And that's about parents who are adopting a more free range parenting style when it comes to raising their kids. They allow their kids outside without supervision. Now, I grew up without supervision quite a bit. In fact, when I was 5 years old and in kindergarten, I would walk home alone every day. I think my mom dropped me off in the morning, but I walked home every day. Um, and never got hit by a car, and was never abducted by aliens. In fact, my mother could hear me whistling tunelessly for like the last quarter mile because I was not good at whistling. I'm still not particularly good at whistling, though I do enjoy doing so occasionally. Um, And when I was a little bit older, I just ran rampant in the forest, in the woods near my house. I was out there constantly. Sadly, quite a bit of those forests have been knocked down to build baseball fields and such for the public. I can kind of understand why they did it, but I also rather miss the trees themselves and the nooks and crannies where I would travel. And I knew those woods like the back of my hand. And while I was never a particularly fast child when it came to running flat out, you could darn well never catch me in those woods if you wanted to chase me, because I knew where everything was. Um, so I really enjoyed those territories, and I was out there by myself alone constantly. Now, one of the reasons I enjoyed being outside alone is because my personal life, I was raised in a household with a psychotic, abusive drunk. So for me, inside the house was not safe. The scariest thing in the world for me was to walk past a darkened doorway, particularly the one in my parents' bedroom, because in my life there really were monsters in the dark. I only ever really felt safe outside, um, particularly safe outside at night, because they couldn't see me either. Um, so being outside alone and spending a lot of time by myself on a regular basis was something that was just no one batted an eye about it. But nowadays, if parents leave children alone, or they allow them to take a bus, or walk to the store, or even walk the dog by themselves, people are calling the cops constantly. And people are like, oh, society is collapsing because parents won't let their children engage. Yes, but the difference is, you see, is that when I was a child, I'm 54 years old, when I was a child, there was no 24-hour news cycles hammering into the heads of the general public. Danger, 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 constantly. Even though crime rates have fallen significantly since the 90s. Right now, a child in America, if you are middle class, is pretty much the safest human being that's ever lived. There is no risk to your kids. And I know you're going to say, what about abductions? Yes, abductions do happen to about 200 kids a year in America. And about 100 of those never come home. And that's a tragedy. It's a horrible thing. But there are millions and millions of children. And the problem is that whenever something does happen, or even suspects of happening, the news cycles just keep repeating it. Now, I've talked about this in the past. Like, a deer has a set of senses that work out to about 100 feet or so. Anything within that 100 feet is a danger to the deer. Anything outside that 100-foot range isn't a danger to the deer, and the deer just does not care about it. It does not matter. This means that if you're more than 100 feet away and you have a rifle or a bow, you can kill a deer, because the deer just doesn't consider you a risk. Now imagine if that deer suddenly had senses that went out to 100 miles. It would be a psychotic, manic mess. And that's the situation we're in. Whenever anything happens in America, or even the world, we hear about it again and again and again. So we get this mental image that there's danger, 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 when most of the time you're hearing the same story from numerous different angles being repeated over and over. So it's not new data coming into your head. It's the same data coming into your head, but you are perceiving it as new data. And so you're thinking, oh, it's happened a dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen, 4 dozen. And it hasn't. It happened once or twice. And the news cycles keep repeating it because if it bleeds, it leads. Whatever gets your eyeballs locked on their screen and their advertisers, it's going to get repeated. So kids being out there alone, walking their dogs, having a paper route, going to the store, going to school, is not a tragedy. And it is not that the society as we know it is collapsing because parents are being paranoid. Neighbors and strangers are being paranoid. No, it's because our news cycles are amplifying things in a way that gives us the impression that the world is far more dangerous than it is. Now, of course, there are places in America that are dangerous, many poor communities. But of course, America completely tends to ignore those because, well, they tend to be people of color, and so that's not important. They're not really important people to pay attention to. It only really matters when it's a white person, and then it gets repeated 1,000 times a day for a month. And it gets people convinced that the world is collapsing around them, and then it convinces them that if parents let their kids outside, the world will collapse around them, and it isn't, and it won't. So why don't we let parents do the job they want to do, and only when they have shown us repeatedly that they're incapable of that job should maybe the community step in and act. And in that case, I'm all for it. You can show that a parent is incompetent, they're neglectful in a serious manner, then yes, we should step in and do something. But going to the store, walking the dog, walking to school, no. Those are not reasons to call the police. Definitely not. So let's talk about this. Do you agree that our news cycles are over-amplifying pieces of information and giving the impression to the public that things are far worse than they are? Or do you really believe things are far worse than they are? Do you believe that the past was safer than the present? Because I'm telling you, I study history, and that really isn't true. And there's always been bad things that happen, and there always will be bad things that happen. But right now, it is far safer today than pretty much any other time in history if you live in America and you're middle class, and particularly if you're white. It does matter. It does. So let's talk about misplaced anxiety and letting kids be kids and letting parents be parents and maybe not listening to the news cycles quite so much.